The SNES was an amazing console, and was home to what would later become some of the most fondly remembered video games of the early 90s. Whether it be amazing platformers, action-adventurers, or party games, the SNES was the little console that could. But one genre in particular saw amazing success on the system, leading to a golden age of some of the best RPGs ever made. Years before Final Fantasy VII would come onto the scene and give the genre mainstream appeal, the SNES was housing some amazing games. So when I'm scrolling through the internet and I discover that not only did JoJo have a game all the way back in the 90s, but that it was also an RPG on the SNES, I got a little bit excited. Of course, it's very easy to mess up a JRPG, and I wasn't expecting Earthbound quality, but I was a little bit more interested than you might expect. The search for a great JoJo game led me here. Can this 1993 adaptation of Stardust Crusaders do any better than our previous contenders? Well, let's talk about that. The game was developed by two teams, COBRA Team and Winkysoft, and was published by COBRA Team. Both of these companies are pretty much non-existent on the internet, with available information being impossible to find. Outside of Winkysoft being responsible for the Super Robot Wars franchise and some contracted work on Puyo Puyo and Codename Steam, there's not much to really talk about. But while I was watching the credits roll by, a couple names popped up that I swore I recognized from somewhere. So I did what any good reviewer would do, and after a quick Google search of each of the names on the credits, I found something that blew my mind. From what I can tell, COBRA Team only ever worked on 2 home console games. However, that doesn't mean that the members never did anything of note, as the team consisted of young Takeyoshi Nakazoto, Hidetoshi Omori, and Shinji Hashimoto. You may recognize these names from little games like Dirge of Cerberus and Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VII, and of course as the brand manager for the Final Fantasy series, co-creator of Kingdom Hearts, and one of the chief executives of Square Enix. Yeah. This is what I meant by mind-blowing. From what I can gather, this was the first game for a lot of these guys, outside of a Dragon Ball Z arcade game that came out earlier that year. And they're not the only people who went on to have a history in the game industry. Jisaku Honda would go on to work on FF10 and Xenogears, and Noriko Kitamura went on to direct the Brain Age games at Nintendo, along with a ton of other credits. My only theory is that after this game, Square either bought out the entirety of COBRA Team, or scouted out the members to come work for them. So while the development of this game is almost a complete mystery, we at least know where some of these people would go on. Of course, this game was probably a first for a lot of these people, and all of these credits would come much later. Did they start off with raw talent, or was their first entry into gaming a tumultuous one? Let's jump straight into it and talk about the gameplay. JoJo is a turn-based RPG, but I hesitate to call it a dungeon crawler. Most of the game involves you moving from town to town and encountering stand users on the way to finding Dio in Egypt. The dungeons mostly consist of fairly straightforward paths with no real deviation, apart from the final dungeon, which actually does have a slightly confusing layout. One interesting thing to note is that the game doesn't have random encounters, opting instead for scripted events. 90% of the fights in the game are against stand users from the manga. However, sometimes approaching chests or other optional areas will result in fighting some vampires. The battle system is pretty minimal, with very few options when it comes to strategy. Before you even get into the fight, there's a tarot card system, where Dio will lay 5 cards in front of you. Picking one will lead to either a buff, like increased damage or healing, or a debuff, such as more stress or less defense. From what I can gather, the system is completely random and not really worth worrying about. Just hope you get lucky every time. Things like stress aren't really worth worrying about either, since I never ran into any downsides, so you can just ignore it. Each character has 2 meters, HP and MP. In most games, MP would be a magic meter, probably used to cast spells, but in this one it's completely different. Your HP is lowered by normal attacks, and your MP counts as a secondary health bar, depleted by enemies demoralizing your party members with threats. If either your MP or HP hit 0, your character will be out of the fight until you revive them. This basically means each character has 2 health bars for you to worry about, but it also means enemies have 2 different health bars that you can focus on. This is when we get into the actual combat. You've got 4 options in any given fight. Attack, which damages the enemy's HP, Talk, which damages their MP, Item, which lets you use healing items, and Check, which unlocks more menus. Using the check button involves letting your character wait a turn or two to come up with an idea, which unlocks a new menu. The idea button is for special fights and will do nothing a lot of the time. Guts will do an attack, but I think it's meant to do more damage, and in some fights you'll have a run option. You've probably noticed that there's a couple of things missing from this menu, like a guard button or any real skills section. This game is pretty basic, There's no buffs or debuffs, there's no elemental weaknesses, and there's no real strategy to speak of. Every fight pretty much boils down to using the Guts command over and over again to do the most damage. But enemies can defend and buff themselves, which puts you at a pretty big disadvantage sometimes. There's another thing worth mentioning when it comes to these fights, and it's how the game handles bosses. Almost every fight in the game is a boss, as there's little to no normal enemy encounters. However, in order to pad out the game's length a little and give the players more than just one fight per boss, you'll fight almost every boss 3 times. The first 2 times, the boss will always run away on the 3rd turn, and none of the damage you dealt will carry over to the 3rd encounter, which is the real fight. This means you're better off just talking or checking the enemy for the first 2 fights, since they have the shortest animations, and only attacking in the 3rd encounter. This is especially annoying because the enemies can damage you during these fights, which ends up with you just wasting healing items all the time without being able to damage them. It causes the game to feel like it's dragging, and you'll just end up mashing A repeatedly just to get through these nothing fights. Besides that, there's nothing to really say about the gameplay. It's about as generic as an old RPG you can get. For the most part, the sprite work is pretty good, especially the character portraits for each party member. Oh, except for Iggy, who's got a double chin for some reason, and I'd really prefer if we could just move on, please. The other thing is that whenever Kakyoin faints, he does the whole, I see you are a man of culture as well face, and I can't unsee it. Besides that, I don't understand the screen real estate. The screen is split into thirds, and changes depending on if you're in or out of battle. In battle, the bottom shows your party members, the middle shows the enemy and your attacks, and the top shows status messages. But outside of battle, the top third is reserved for dialogue, which means you're only playing within this tiny sliver of the screen. The only thing I can imagine is that it made the game a lot cheaper to make, since your backgrounds only have to fit this tiny rectangle and not the whole screen, on top of only having to draw characters from the chest up. Most of the sprites are fine, being instantly recognizable as the character you're fighting or playing as. The only problems really come about once they look directly at the player. Side view looks good, this way does not. Also, you can play as any of the Crusaders while walking around, and playing as Iggy ends up like this. I get they're trying to show that he's beneath them, but it looks kinda bad. Another decision that I imagine was a cost-cutting technique is in the attack animations. Every character has a few, and I'm not sure if some of them are critical hits or if they're all the same, but they'll use them as the battle goes on. Similarly, when a character dodges an attack, it plays the same attack animation. This would make sense if it was the only one, but most characters also have their own dodge animation. Okay, well, animation is being kind, but they have a specific one to use instead of reusing the same 5-second animation each time. As far as music goes, I have a bit of a mixed opinion. Listening to the tracks by themselves, a lot of them are really good. There's a lot of style changes going on that keeps each song sounding fairly unique. And the battle theme is quite good for getting you pumped up, along with the special boss music for Vanilla Ice and Dio being top quality. The problem I have is a problem I have with a lot of older game OSTs. They're too short. There's only 15 songs in the soundtrack, and that includes the title and credits track. For a game that took me over 5 hours to beat, 13 tracks isn't really enough to fill all that space. Combined with the low memory space and an audio system that I don't even understand myself, so I won't even try to explain it to you, SNES music very rarely lasts for more than 1 minute without looping. It doesn't matter how strong the opening 20 seconds of a battle theme is, because after you hear it over and over and over again constantly looping, it's gonna lose some of its luster. But I have to admit that when I'm not listening to it on repeat in the game, some of these songs are actually really good. With all that crap out of the way, let's talk about my favorite part, the story. I know what you're thinking. Sean, there's no way you could condense the entirety of Part 3 into a 5-hour story. And what about all those weird stands that aren't really fights like the Darby brothers? Well, those questions are actually connected. The answer is, of course, trim a lot of the fat, completely change a lot of the encounters, and turn almost every stand user into a generic battle. For example, remember Greyfly was the school's janitor and attacked Jotaro and Kakyoin in the bathroom? Or who could forget the orangutan forever, one of the most unique stand users in Part 3, and his stand strength, which was always a giant mansion in Japan? Or how about the fights with Death 13 and Midler, which both happen on the flight from Japan? I could go on, but I think you get the gist. The game flies through each stand user, pushing the party from fight to fight constantly, meaning every new area you enter you'll encounter at least 2 or 3 stand users. On top of this, some stands are just cut entirely like Empress, and other users like Oingo and Boingo are reduced to mere background characters with no real boss fight. To take it one step further, any of the weird fights like playing games with the younger Derby or Alessi turning the cast into babies is pretty much replaced with a normal fight. There's only so much you can do on the SNES, unfortunately. The only time the game does get unique is in fights like Death 13, where you have to run away from the fight in order to regroup and figure out what to do, but this just delays the inevitable fight where you beat up the stand. Judgment gets a similar treatment where he makes you fight 3 Jotaro clones, then a whole horse clone, and ending with a straight up fight with Judgment. The only unique stand user who remains pretty much completely unchanged is Gambling with Derby. However, this section just involves you letting the game autoplay the cards until you eventually win with Jotaro, so there's not really anything of worth. Besides that, there's not a lot to talk about, except the ending. So, while the game hasn't exactly been entirely faithful up until this point, the final dungeon is about as non-canon as you can get. The first big difference is that everyone survives. And not only does everyone survive, but everyone fights the same stand users. The whole gang fights Pet Shop and Vanilla Ice instead of being separated, and everyone's there for the final fight with Dio. There's no ultimate Dio or Joestar blood drinking, it's just a normal straight up fight. But my favorite thing about this ending is how they learn to handle the world. As I'm sure you all remember in the original manga, Jotaro discovers that Star Platinum is actually a similar stand to the world, allowing him to learn time stop abilities and ultimately defeat Dio. Well, if you thought that was a bit too unexplained or convenient, then don't worry, this game offers a far greater explanation as to how Jotaro learns how to stop time. After defeating Vanilla Ice, Iggy picks up a key which opens a chest in Dio's mansion. The chest contains an item so powerful, so amazing, that even Araki himself could not come up with such a brilliant idea. From out of the chest comes a time cap, and once Jotaro equips it, he can now stop time too. Yes, it's seriously called a time cap. For real, I kind of understand why they made this decision, since you have to actively seek out the upgrade in order to fight the final boss. There's some game logic there. Otherwise, if you don't find it, you just end up doing terrible damage, but Dio has 1000 HP, so you're pretty much screwed. But they really could have tried to make it a little less dumb and contrived. It's a time cap, he puts on a hat, and that's the best you could come up with. After equipping the time cap and defeating Dio, the Crusaders leave Egypt, Holly is healed, and the world is saved. All thanks to a hat in a chest in a dank dungeon. There's not a lot for me to really say in this summary. This game's about as generic as you can get. There's a lot of mashing and it's got a lot of old and outdated game mechanics, but it has the ability to piss in a urinal, so I guess people kind of still play it every now and then. If you do decide to play the game, then there's only 2 things that I should warn you about. The first is that there is an English patch that exists, which means finally you don't have to play a JoJo game in Japanese, and the second is that opening the status menu causes the game to just bug out. Apparently that's part of the original and not just the English translation, but I can't confirm. But in the end, how does it compare to our previous contenders? Well, for comedy, Phantom Blood still takes the cake. Nothing beats Phantom Blood for that. And for gameplay, Vento Aureo did have some pretty innovative levels, and it had some good ideas, although it was a bit flawed in how it presented those ideas. So I feel like this game just sits at the bottom, unfortunately. But hey, if there's any aspiring game creators out there, well then, think of this as an uplifting message. One day you too could go from making this to making this. Hey, thanks for watching this video, another JoJo game review done, and another game that I never have to play ever again. This video was meant to come out a couple weeks ago, but I had a lot of things coming up, events and holidays and stuff between when I meant to bring it out and now, and I just decided instead of rushing it and killing myself just to make this video, that I would just wait. So that's why there's been such a long wait. I'm really sorry, but I mean, I hope you enjoyed it. But if you want to keep up with me between uploads, we now have an official Discord. There's an invite link at the very top of the description, so if you want to click on that and join, I'd really appreciate it. Just come and chat. I'm usually lurking around in there, messing with people. We have a shitposting channel for all of your dumb JoJo memes. And yeah, there's an announcement channel for whenever I stream or upload a video. So if you want to keep updated, that's pretty much the best place to be. Other than that, you can follow me on Twitter at cicada_wave if you want to, and follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/cicadawave, no underscore. On Mondays, we're streaming Jack 3, we're about 30% of the way through that game, and we're just about to finish DMC 1 and start DMC 2 on Wednesdays. So, if you want to come see me play a really bad game, DMC 2 will start soon. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks again for watching. Tell me what you think about this game, again, if you played it. If not, if you've seen Vinesauce play it, which is probably where most people have seen this game, to know what you think. Please do all that stuff, share it with a friend. I'd really appreciate retweets and things. It's how small channels like this get off the ground. Hopefully have another video very soon. I have an idea churning, and I think it's going to come out let's not put a date on it. But yeah, if you want to keep up, those are the best ways to keep up. And thank you again for watching, and I'll see you when I see you. Thanks, guys.